Support for this program comes from Jazz on the Tube, the Internet's largest collection of free streamable classic jazz videos. From Miles Davis to Louis Armstrong, from Thelonious Monk to Duke Ellington. You'll find it all on jazzonthetube.com. Start your free subscription today.
Hi, and welcome to Jazz Talk, a Jazz on the Tube podcast. My name is Ken McCarthy, and this is where we talk with people who are doing important work that supports and illuminates the music we love. The writers, the scholars, the educators, the filmmakers, the producers, and more. And we did an extended interview with Judy Carmichael a while back, and I counted how many podcasts we'd done, and I realized that was number 50. So
really?
Yeah, I'm really surprised.
That's great.
Yeah, it adds up. So I thought, well, let's make Judy number 51 as well, because we are taking a little break. We took a little break, but now we're coming back to it. And we talked a lot about Judy's amazing show, Jazz Inspired. Judy, I keep listening to episodes. And before we get on to our other topic today, I just want to say to everybody about Jazz Inspired, it is absolute university postgraduate level education in music and jazz. And I don't mean that in the sense of it's dry and stuffy and hard to understand, but I mean that if you want to go really, really deep into this music, these interviews that Judy does will take you there. They are just amazing. And everyone is better than the last that I listened to. I was impressed the last time we spoke, and I listened to maybe 6 interviews, and now I just keep listening to more and more. It's amazing what you've accomplished with that.
Thank you. That means a lot. I've worked very hard on that show, and I'm the producer as well, and the fundraiser, as everything in NPR, as you know, and everything. So that means a lot to me, Ken. Thank you very, very much.
Well, it's true, and it's jazzinspired.com, and there really is nothing else like it. There's a lot of good interviews out there in the jazz world, but you're doing something. I wish I could articulate what it is that makes your interview so different. I mean, one thing is you go very deep, but you never really get into inside baseball. In other words, you don't go so far into technical issues that a layperson can't follow, which, you know what I mean? You both go deep and stay at a level that anybody that loves music and has an ear can follow you. I
really appreciate that. I can tell you what my focus is and what I've had good friends, say to me about the kind of conversations that I'm interested in. And I think I bring that to Jazz Inspired in that a common thing with Americans, especially in New York, I live in New York, is for somebody, when they first meet you, is say, "What do you do?" And which I've always thought shows a lack of imagination, and it's a bit rude. You just go right to this place. What do you do? Now, a lot of people aren't defined by what they do, or they don't want to talk about what they do. Right. What I will do is ask something else of them and let these things unfold. And I brought that sensibility. My friends have pointed this out because one of them said, you won't ask somebody if they have children, but if they bring up they don't have children, you'll say, why? I will go to a deeper, I want to know what they're thinking and why they've made the decisions they have. And when I was designing Jazz Inspired, I was thinking about that. I thought, I want to, with somebody like Alan Broadbent, he happened to have a CD that had just come out, so we talked about that. But I was interested in his long history. Alan just turned 72. This is not a man with a short career. He's had a long, varied, very interesting career. And so I wanted to talk to him about what he loves, what made him do this originally, what it was like. Coming from New Zealand, coming that far away, that's where he grew up, and coming here and I knew that we had a shared history and that I'm from California and he lived in California for years, but we both much prefer New York. So I thought that was interesting. I know why I feel that way. Why does he feel that way? And so those things I think everyone in the listening audience can relate with. And those are the things that go deep inside in an intimate way, but they don't go deep inside in a way that excludes someone because they don't have great knowledge of the music. We can teach them about it or bring them into how we listen, how we think as creative artists. And we're both musicians. And I know I just interviewed Chris Brubeck, and who's a multi-instrumentalist and composer, and his father's obviously Dave Brubeck. And at the end of the interview, I was so delighted because I thanked him, and I did this just a couple of days ago. And I said, thank you for taking this time. And he said, this is so great to talk to somebody who's so enthusiastic and a musician. And it's very much how I felt when you and I first spoke, Ken, is that you are obviously such a lover of this music and so enthusiastic. So number one, that's a lot more fun to talk to someone like that. And in the case of Chris saying this, 9 times out of 10, 99.9 times he's interviewed, it is not by a musician, not by a fellow musician. So they're going to be thinking in a different way. We're really having an exchange between two creative people instead of news person or somebody who is on the outside looking in, who very often I hear interviews and the interviewer is too much of a fan in a weird way. I want them to just get to it. Don't be an acolyte. Be an interested party. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Exactly. And sometimes it degenerates into sort of a celebrity interview, as if it was Entertainment Tonight, as opposed to talking with an artist. And I think the thing that you did with Alan that jumps out was how you led him to talk about his development as an artist, where he started and how things evolved and the choices he made and the things that attracted him and the things that were, big experiences for him. Mm-hmm. And that's very different than, hey, what was Miles Davis like? It seems like 90% of all jazz interviews are like, and what was your experience with Miles Davis like?
It's so insulting. And I'm hoping that people that listen to our conversation here, Ken, I'm telling you now, people, don't ask another artist something like that. Because, number one, it shows how voyeuristic you're being. It shows no respect for the artist who's in front of you. Because this comes up because I remember specifically when I was working at Disneyland, which was one of my early gigs, I had a musician with me, a contemporary. We were both in our 20s, and he was very excited that I knew Benny Carter. And so he wanted to meet Benny. And I introduced him to Benny. And the first thing he said is, instead of, this is a great honor to meet you, Benny Carter, he said, what was it like working with Django in the 30s? And so Benny didn't know him anything. He doesn't have the right to ask him something. Plus, it also says, I'm not interested at all in what you are and what you've done, Benny Carter. I'm only interested in the fact that you knew Django Reinhardt. That's just incredibly insulting.
Right.
And that's why most musicians, especially the great ones, don't want to be interviewed, because it turns into either this kind of voyeurism, and people often want these stories, but these aren't just stories to us. This is our life.
Right.
My knowing Basie was a very important developmental period of my life. It wasn't just, ooh, wow, I met Basie.
Right.
So you can ask people these things in a different kind of context. And, that Alan, those 2 hours, I wasn't planning on it being 2 hours with Alan Broadbent. That just developed that way, and it got very deep, as you heard. I mean, he talked about his issues and a very unhappy period of his life. I don't want to give a lot away. I think people should listen to it, but I've gotten a lot of feedback on that show and what it meant to people emotionally, because they went through some of the same emotional things that Alan did, that he talked about. He was very revealing. We went to a place that I wasn't expecting, and it was great.
It clearly was not your run-of-the-mill interview, and you know what also was great about that interview was, it's funny, we're having an interview about an interview, but we're doing it for a reason. I really want to inspire people to find the time to get to the jazzinspired.com website and listen to these interviews. But one of the other beautiful things about that 2 interviews you did was you spent a lot of time listening to music together, and amazing music too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
And that's what I was going to say that people should know, is this is an interview show that has a lot of music. So one of my goals, one of my hopes, is that people will get to listen the way professional listeners listen and appreciate music on a deeper level, not just in a way that people are often intimidated by jazz. And I think you and I discussed this last time, that very often they'll apologize and say, well, I don't really know that much about jazz. And, they feel bad because jazz is a very sophisticated, complex music. And they may just not like it, but maybe it's not likable. Maybe they haven't heard the jazz that appeals to them, but they think there's something wrong with them. And that's not the thing. It's like me going to a museum. I love to go with an artist, with a painter friend, who I'll look at a painting and I'll like it, and I'll have an emotional connection. But then if I have a painter with me, they'll say, look at how so-and-so used this particular kind of red and what it does to the composition of the painting. And suddenly that painting comes to life in a different way. And with Alan, he's so articulate and so deeply knowledgeable about this music that we wound up talking mainly about symphonies, and which afterwards we both commented on it, that I came to Alan Broadbent because of his piano playing. That's why I've been a fan all these years. I knew he conducted for everybody, Diana Krall and Kristen Chenoweth and all these people, but my main attraction to him was as a pianist. And so, but he was talking about his influences. And because I'm the producer of the show, when I was editing it, and Alan was so passionate about Mahler, I thought, well, how many people in my audience have ever sat and listened to a 7-minute Mahler movement? How often have I done that?
Right.
And so I thought, I'm just going to play 7 minutes of Mahler and let people hear why this music is so affecting, why this has done this to Alan. I cried when I was editing the show, listening again to what Alan said about that, and then listening to the Mahler and thinking, oh, my word. For a minute, we all got to live inside Alan Broadbent's head. That's pretty exciting.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it was. And I don't know how you did this, but I could feel Alan and you listening to the Mahler, and it somehow made it, and then I felt I was there with you, that we, all 3 of us, and anybody could have this experience who listens to that show, that all 3 of us were sitting there reverently, carefully listening to this great, great work of art, which happened not to be jazz, and yet was completely inspiring, and I'm sort of really glad I listened to it. And now I'm a Mahler fan, which I never expected to become.
And Mahler's pretty intimidating. I think if you brought up Mahler, most people know that name, but if you brought it up, most people would go, oh, well, I don't know a lot about Mahler, and isn't that kind of heavy, and this and that. But wow, when you get to listen to it the way Alan Broadbent listens to it, then it's a whole other thing.
Yep, which leads to another issue, which is jazz musicians spend time, not all of them, and maybe not a lot of time, but some more than others, they spend time listening to the classics.
Right.
Charlie Parker was famous for listening to Stravinsky and other composers like that. So they may not be playing classical music themselves, but they are digging and learning from and being moved by classical music.
Oh, absolutely. And I will tell you an anecdote about Count Basie that your listeners will love and you'll love. When I first got to know him, and I heard him a lot because he and the band came to Disneyland when I was working there, so when they would do a run, they would be there for a week or two, and I'd get to hear him every night, and I got to know some of the guys, got to know Basie, different things. But when I knew him, and then I heard him in different parts of the world as well and became friends. But the point is, at one point in my youthful exuberance, I mean, I can't believe I had the nerve to ask him this, but it was sort of like going to the mountain, and seeing God. And I said, what is the answer? What is, Mr. Basie, What is the answer to me really being great? What should I be doing? How should I develop? What should I do? And he looked at me and he said, listen, and then didn't say anything else. And I said, yes, but what else? And he said, just listen.
Wow.
And it was so deep, and it said everything. And, I mean, what a message now, because we're especially in a time when no one's listening to each other, and not taking the time to listen to music, and radio stations are certainly having less jazz on because it's all become talk. I feel like it's all talk radio and no one's listening.
Yep. And what's so interesting about this is that he didn't say get a PhD in musicology.
No.
He didn't say go to a conservatory.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't say lock yourself in a room for 18 hours a day and master an instrument. And so what the advice he gave you as a professional musician is equally applicable to someone who just simply loves the music and wants to know more about it. It's there. Just listen.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, Basie talked exactly like he played. It was all pared down to the essence, and he could do more with a look without doing anything else, with a raised eyebrow. And I swear that his manner and comportment was as influential on me personally in my career as his music was. I mean, his music is what inspired me to do what I'm doing, and that's what set me off. But I had a natural affinity, even though I'm an exuberant, outgoing person. I hate histrionics. I hate anything false. And I got to see all these different big bands at Disneyland, and I could compare them all. And I remember Lionel Hampton was there for a week, and I saw him a number of times. And I loved him as a musician, obviously, but there was loads of histrionics. And I even followed him once at the Nice Festival early in my career. And we were all supposed to play an hour, and he played, and I was following, if you can imagine, I was following Lionel Hampton playing solo piano. And for this big festival and some Roman ruins and all this. But Lionel Hampton and his big band played an hour, then he played 45 minutes of my hour. Until finally the sound guys just dragged him off the stage, almost literally, but they did go out and get him and say, give this kid, Judy Carmichael, at least 15 minutes, to do her concert. And so seeing him at Disneyland, I thought, I don't want to be that. That's not how I want to be on stage. I want the music to speak for itself. I don't want to have to dance around. I don't want to have to jump around. It worked great for him, but that was not me. And I thought, if that is what one has to do, then I cannot do this as a living. I have to do something else. And I remember the next week, Count Basie came. And I didn't know him then. But he came, and here was a guy who didn't even get up from the piano. He would just look and maybe point at somebody, but usually it was his head nodding at one of the musicians to take a solo. And I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to have the music speak for itself, and I want to be so cool that I don't have to do any waving, any of it. And funnily enough, I got to know those guys, and they all felt the same way. Some of the guys had been with Lionel Hampton's band, too, and they much preferred. and respected the basic way of doing things. Because they didn't need to be waved at or jumped around. These guys knew what they were doing. They were on the road every day,
Sure,
for 300 days a year. But it's interesting. So, yeah, Basie's way of talking and being was all, and his playing, very similar, very similar.
We find that we're putting more and more Basie videos in the circulation on our Jazz on the Tube website.
Oh, I've seen some of those. They're great. They're great.
We're so lucky that there were cameras. I learned this from an interview from Wayne Shorter about something that I wasn't aware of, that we're obviously finding jazz shorts, and we're finding them in 2018 out of context. And in this interview with Wayne Shorter, he says, he remembered being a 10-year-old, 11-year-old going to the movie theater in Newark, and there'd be, vaudeville. Movies were very different when he was growing up. And then there would be some jazz shorts, and that's where he first saw Duke Ellington and Count Basie and people like that. And he saw them as a relatively young kid.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is something I was completely not aware of. I knew that there was sort of a renaissance, or let's put it this way, a high point of jazz filming taking place on American TV in the 50s and early 60s. And, of course, the BBC and all the great European channels. So we were aware of all that material. But I just wasn't aware that jazz shorts were a part of life for anybody that went to the movies in the 40s.
Well, it was that, and there was also a company called the Soundy Company. Do you know about that?
Oh, yeah. One of the films that we ran was called a Soundy, and I didn't know what that meant. No,
okay, so a Soundy, there was the Soundy Company, and it existed, I think, from 1939 to 42, or 43, very, very short period. And I look at the Soundies as early music videos. And what they were, there were Soundy machines, and they were, funnily enough, every now and then those things will turn up in like little porn houses where you walk in and you can give a quarter and you see a little film. Because I asked one of the guys who knew this company, and I said, whatever happened to the machines? He said, that's where they are, because you can show little videos on them. But they'd be in train stations or various places, and you'd put, I don't know, a dime, whatever it was then, into this machine like you would a jukebox, except that there was a screen. And you would watch a little video, and it's the length of a tune, and it would tell a story. So they are early music videos, because if you think about MTV and what was happening with the early videos, they told it like Thriller, something like that. That was a story, of something going on. And there's a famous one of Fats Waller doing The Joint is Jumpin', and the set is a rent party. And it shows all these people at a party, a rent party, for your listeners who don't know what that is. In Harlem, they used to throw up, if they couldn't pay the rent, they would have a party and they'd supply the food, and then everybody would pay something. They'd usually pay a quarter at the door. They'd get a band, and they'd raise money for their rent by having a party. Mm-hmm. So there's this film of Fats and his band singing The Joint is Jumpin', which the lyric is all about the joint is jumpin', we're having a great time, we're having a party, and it's funny, and you see everybody dancing, and then at the end, the police come because somebody calls and complains that the party's too loud, and the police come in, and the girls all run over, and they dance with the police, so the police don't arrest them. So it's this very funny little story of a party, but it is the length of the tune, The Joint is Jumpin'. So they made these different soundies, and I know about this because when I first came to New York in the 80s, this is pre-YouTube, of course, I had never seen Fats Waller on film. Mm-hmm. I had just listened to his records, of course. And there was a collector who became a fan of mine and invited me over his house, and he'd been collecting these films since he was a kid. His name was Ernie Smith. His collection is now at the Smithsonian. And he specifically said, have you ever seen Fats on film? And he had all these old soundies, which you can now see on YouTube. And he also, another interesting bit of history is that lots of movies, if they had any blacks in the movie, any black people, when the film toured the southern part of the United States, they would take that part of the film out. And so what they had to do is, if it was a musical number, they would make it something that was not integral to the plot. So they would take that part out of the film, and then they could tour it with you still understanding what was happening to the film.
Sure.
And so and that's all part of our horrible racist history. But what it's given us is a fabulous collection of music by these people on film, because what they did is they made standalone musical numbers that didn't have to be part of the film. And so those all exist. So there's lots of shorts that way that they are just a musical number.
Okay.
And so those things exist too. So those would be things that people from that era would get to see, or they'd see it within a film.
Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting history. So a lot of these things that people can now see on YouTube, that's what they are. And if your listeners will look at this, because they'll listen to us and then they'll go to YouTube, they will notice that very often, if the musical number is all black people, they'll always be either a bellhop or a waitress or a maid. They will be some sort of service person. That's the reason, because within the plot of the film, there's a famous one called Hell's a Poppin', which has the Lindy Hoppers. Yep. And that's what happens. They hear this band playing, and they stop cleaning house, and then they go in and they break into a dance number. And that's why they're all dressed the way they are.
Gotcha. Wow. Well, I'm glad they made those things, and who knew that they had that kind of interesting technology that only lasted, I'm looking it up right now, it just lasted for a short period of time, between 1940 and 46.
Okay, so I was off by a few years, but it was around that period, yep.
Wow,
yeah.
Wow. Well, great. I've learned something new about the world of video and jazz. Hey, Judy, you mentioned that today we're not going to have a long time to talk, and we're coming up on the time that you mentioned you had to leave. So let's wind it down. And again, I want to encourage everybody, jazzinspired.com. It'll change your life as a music lover.
Thank you.
I really believe that. Imagine if you could go to Harvard, and imagine if Harvard was a good place for music, and you could go to Harvard and really dive in deep to the music you love. That's what listening to these shows is like. So we're going to have you back another time, because we didn't get a lot of time with you this time. But thank you so much.
I would love it, Ken. I love talking to you, and thank you for spreading the word about this music in such a beautiful way. Your website is just fantastic, and I've been telling everybody about going there and what you're doing to promote jazz in the best possible way. I think it's absolutely fabulous.
Oh, well, thank you, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you did, please share it. That's how we grow. And remember to subscribe to jazzonthetube.com, the Internet's largest collection of free, streamable, classic jazz videos.